Hey, thanks for listening to the James Altucher Show on YouTube. You're going to hear directly from peak performers and all of my personal heroes who have defeated all odds and decided that the only way to be truly successful in this world is to do what I call choosing yourself. I upload a new video every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. So subscribe to my channel and click on the bell notification now so you don't miss a thing. Ready, willing, and able, Steve Cohen, the producer of the world-famous podcast, The James Altucher Show. People are going to think I'm only having you on the podcast because we have no other guests, but obviously we have plenty of other guests. But I specifically asked you, and I don't even know if you wanted to come on. I specifically wanted you to come on this podcast to underline several things. Were you hesitant at first?
I was appreciative that you made the gesture because I think you're a great interview and you make everybody better. But yeah, I don't know. I wasn't hesitant. I guess I was. Because I think that I want our listeners to get the best out of this podcast, and so I think I was a little bit like, hey, and plus I've got to know these other amazing guests on the show, so have a lot to live up to. So
yeah, you've got that. Well, that's the first thing I want to talk about. Now, first off, how many years were you in radio, and how many years were you in TV?
Okay, I started at WCBS Radio here in New York, and I went from local radio to network radio to ABC.
What did you do for that?
I started out as a desk assistant, and just entry level, and you kind of worked overnights, and you would do. They had carts back then, and it was the number one or two all news radio station in the country. 1010 wins in WCBS Radio, and it was.
Is that because it was in New York or because you worked there? Okay, wait.
Just, go ahead. WCBS Radio.
What did you rise up to? What was your final title?
I was managing editor over there, so it was. So
you picked
I spent there 5 years. Yeah, I picked stories, and it was an afternoon drive show, and we did interviews every day.
So you picked stories for the number one radio show.
Yeah.
Was Howard Stern on the show then?
Howard Stern wasn't. No, Howard Stern was on K-Rock. I mean, he was part of CBS Radio, but he wasn't. It was an all-news station, so. Our biggest competition was 1010 Wins, which famously said, like, oh, you give us 22 minutes, we'll give you the world. And so, but WCBS Radio, some of those people are still there.
Okay, so then what happened?
Then I went.
I have to interrupt you a lot.
Yeah, of course, obviously. Then I went to ABC Radio. Somebody who had worked at WCBS Radio had offered me a position over there, and it was a bigger title.
And I remember when we were on when I was on Dan Harris's podcast over at ABC, you're walking through ABC, and everyone's like, Steve, like,
it was
this
great.
is the best. They were telling me this is the best person I ever worked with. Like, we couldn't walk 5 feet without someone else stopping you at ABC.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was almost like James Apalooza in Dallas, where you were getting mobbed.
It was Steve Apalooza at ABC. So what was your highest title at ABC?
I had a title called Manager of News Planning. It was a network radio station, and I was there around the millennium. And so, like, I kind of was in charge of millenniums, just stories about the millennium. Remember the Y2K problem? Or in 2000, there was an Olympics. There was presidential race. And so a lot, and it was a national newsroom. I also was there on 9/11, and I remember, when that happened, when those planes.
Were you at work at when the planes hit?
Yeah, I remember it obviously distinctly because at that point.
By the way, we're gonna. I just want to explain, and then I'll get the arc of this is going to be. This is a podcast about peak performance. I'm going to explain why the reasons why I think you're such a peak performer. But I'm just getting a little bit of background because you've been exposed to almost every branch of media there is.
Yeah.
So, but now I'm curious about, and I think the specific skills you have, people could learn from. But now I'm really curious about like 9/11. How did you jump into action and cover the story?
Well, in 9/11, I was one of the managers there, and it was at 8 or something in the morning. And I remember I was in my office, among other reasons, because at the time I was considering moving to TV, and I had an interview at Good Morning America on that day at September 11th. And so I was watching Good Morning America, and I remember like Charlie Gibson and Diane. I was watching Diane Sawyer and them, but then you saw news locally, like a plane hit the World Trade Center.
So did you jump up and start
I
calling
jumped
reporters?
up, and I wasn't honestly sure. Like when you're at national radio, and obviously there were other managers, and everybody started stirring. I wasn't that high up on the totem pole, but I was one of the managers. And I remember, you like everybody else, you're kind of like, okay, if there's a fire at the World Trade Center, is it a national story? Do you break into like the thousands of affiliates across the country? You know, at the time, it was hard for me to kind of realize that, but. One thing I did follow up back on in February, I had been sent to this conference on terrorism in the Chicago Tribune did it, the McCormick Foundation. And I remember it was one of those things where you would go and there was like 50 to 60 people in media there. And a lot of those people you eventually saw on TV were all there. And I was, correspondents or ambassadors. I remember there was a guy, Jerry Hauer, at, Jerry Hauer was in charge of the mayor's like emergency management thing. Then he went on to work for Kroll. And I remember we got our anchors in there. And once everything started materializing, we were on the air, obviously, for like a week straight, with just updates and all kind of correspondence. But I remember calling Jerry Hauer because...
See, by the way, and this is
Yeah.
this is the beginnings of how you developed your superpower, which I'll get to in a little bit. But here's an event that you went to 6 months earlier than 9/11. You probably had every single person at that conference in your contacts list. You immediately called, someone, and he was like probably happy to hear from you given this event and everything. And you started working out a plan.
Yeah, well, he bought us a lot of time because he had a lot of credibility, and it was Jerry Hauer. And I remember very distinctly, he felt like this was a totally new thing, and because when I went to
totally new thing in terms of terrorism.
Totally new thing in terrorism. And I remember at one of those conferences, and I'm sure people go to a lot of them, and you're kind of not paying attention, and you're kind of like, oh yeah, this is gonna happen. Like, and they were talking about like, I remember NBC, like, different kinds of chemical weapons, and I forget what the acronym, biological, chemical, or and nuclear terrorism. And Jerry was one of the lecturers there, and I kind of knew him from Mayor Giuliani's office, and I imagine I was one of the first people who called him because it was before 9 o'clock. I mean, it was right when it happened. And he told our anchors in our live breaking coverage, he said, this is different, this kind of thing, because before terrorists would get in a plane and they would probably, they would look to hold it hostage. And he said, guys, if somebody wants to take a plane and crash it, what could you do, once they have the plane?
And so before 9 a.m. on that day, even... nobody was totally sure it was terrorism. People weren't really. I don't think people were really sure it was terrorism until the Pentagon got hit, which was more around like 9:15 or 9:30.
It was definitely. He was the first person I called, and I remember it was really early, and I could be off on the time, but it was definitely right when right around when those planes hit, and you knew that something was wrong. And I just suspected that he was a guy.
So
who
did
was
you break into? You make the decision?
By that
all
point,
the affiliates.
Yeah, we were like, now we're going into live breaking coverage, and then people were down by 9/11 and by the ground zero, and then it began, weeks of coverage, with everything.
Okay, so then after that, what was your next?
After that, like a couple of months later, I was considering going to Good Morning America or CBS early show, and
why'd you want to get into TV?
I just felt like I was ready to do something else.
What made you feel ready?
I felt like the gum was losing its flavor. I'd been doing it for a while, and I felt like I was ready to do something. I think I was ready to kind of progress into that, and I think everybody's career is different. In college, I was one of the editors of the school paper, and I went from like print to, then I liked radio. I liked the immediacy of radio. And I kept getting bigger positions, but I think I was ready to try something different, and TV excited me. And
so you were always interested in journalism in some form or other. Yeah, at University of Michigan, you were one of the editors of the school paper. You got into radio, then you went into TV.
Yes.
And so what was your? By the way, I don't know if I ever told you this. In the late 1950s, my dad was one of the editors of the University of Michigan paper. So,
yeah,
and at the same time as
Tom Hayden,
no,
Arthur Miller.
There was a novelist. God, I forgot her name. Margaret something.
Oh wow, Spellman.
No,
Okay,
I forget. I'll
I'm gonna
look it
stop
up.
guessing. Yeah.
But okay, so
Oh wow, that's very cool.
so then the TV.
And
What
then
was
I came over to the CBS early show, and we were still doing 9/11 stories. And
how does someone know when they're ready to not necessarily make a lateral shift in career, but a kind of vertical shift? You know, like essentially you were feeling like, okay, I've done this radio for a long time, and I'm ready to kind of take a jump in company and a jump in kind of medium.
yeah, well, I had looked at Good Morning America, and at the time they were making me an offer too, as was the early. I think once like I didn't have an interview that day, then I remember that my dad had a patient. My dad is a physician. He had a patient who was an editor there, and he said, well, why doesn't he talk to the early show? You know, if he's interested in Good Morning America. And then I'd started my career at CBS Radio, and I kind of liked the culture a little bit different than ABC TV. You know, not that
Why
I
is
was that
that?
familiar with it. I felt like when you'd go around CBS, you had kind of these ink-stained wretches, and they kind of had that reputation with kind of venerable show like 60 Minutes, and it had been around for a long time. And ABC seemed more glamorous, and the offices were even nicer. And, you know, CBS was kind of dingier, and those people were, you know, just kind of rolled up their sleeves. And that was my perception of it. Like Dan Rather, Andy Rooney, and
Walter
Mike
Cronkite,
Wallace.
wasn't he?
Walter Cronkite was.
Not at that time, but
No,
you know, in the
he
history.
had left in 1981, and Dan Rather came. So yeah, and so I felt like that's where I started, and I also felt like when I would see the people at ABC, and I interacted with a lot of them because at radio, like I'd have to go over to meetings with the national. It was something called News One, which is still around, or TV or .com, and you'd go deal with all these different people. So I'd see them, or you'd have correspondents from 2020 or Good Morning America, where you'd be on conference calls. So you were there at the culture. And
In CBS?
at ABC.
At ABC. So who was in charge of .com then at ABC?
ABCnews.com was a guy named Bernie Gershon. Very talented guy, you know, and just really smart and ahead of the curve with things.
And what's he doing right now?
He is a consultant, you know, Bernie. You know, he left. He kind of is doing his own thing. He's doing some very cool things.
See, but by the way, the reason I ask,
Yeah.
I don't actually care what he's doing. The reason I ask is that this was 18 years ago, and we're going to get to your super
sure.
mutant power
Yeah.
slow, bit by bit. This is 18 years ago. You probably could call him right now, and he'd pick up the phone and say, "Hey, Steve Cohen."
Yeah.
And you know I picked a random thing out of
Yeah.
all the departments you just
Yeah.
mentioned. I said, "Who was it, and what's he doing now?" I don't remember from the year 2000 what anybody who
Yeah.
anybody was that I was working with and what they're doing now, except for maybe like one person who I'm still working with.
I joke sometimes like that I'm a diamond, I'm forever. Like I try and just, if I'm with you, I'm with you, you know, and I appreciate people.
It's hard to
Yeah.
keep that up with 100,000 people, which is what I suspect is your actual the size of your network.
Yeah, I definitely have a lot of people in my Rolodex or phone. I definitely do, you know. I just try to be very genuine. I'm not great on social media, like, which is probably a fault of mine.
And yet, people think social media is networking, but I've seen real networking in how you operate, and we'll get to that in a second. Let's just so now.
But I guess my point with that was I always was very skeptical of a lot of that, even the phrase network, or, you know, I always felt like
it's a little fake.
I felt it was fake, and I just felt like I never want to handle people. For those who are listening, I have my quote bunnies up, like Richard Nixon. I'm not a crook. But I think that I remember Madonna once said, like, she said, insecure people reinvent themselves and secure people evolve, which isn't meant to be a diss, but to the author of Reinvent Yourself. But I also...
I was an insecure person.
But I also feel like, and maybe it's semantics, but I felt like insecure people network and secure people offer their friendship. They want to work with you, and they want to make things a win-win. And like, hey, how can we all do stuff together? Like jazz musicians play music or pick up basketball, just kind of like, hey, let's work together. Let's really make things interesting, and let's create something. And so I've always kind of had that instinctive ability to do that. And I always just tried to. I remember Harvey McKay wrote a book called "Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty," and I just always tried to just do my homework every day and then compile a list. And news is always about contacts and associations. It's about, oh, this thing is happening in terrorism. Who can we associate with it, and who's our contact, and how can you get to them quickly? And when I was in radio and I started, and obviously, I guess like looking back. Yeah, I spent a long time doing it, and we talk a lot about the 10,000 hours, and people at radio used to say, like, oh, what's the world's largest microphone, a telephone? Like you can call anybody, and I always felt like, yeah, I was definitely very competitive, and I felt like, yeah, of course I'm going to get that person. And when
when there's nothing happening, do you have ways of keeping the network intact?
Yeah.
So like, do you if you see someone in the news, you
Yeah.
send a note and say,
Yes.
congratulations, you did this?
Yeah, because I think that one of my bigger influences was the basketball coach John Wooden, and he always felt like the slightest good deed was the best. The slightest good deed is better than the greatest of intentions, and so I want to be happy for other people, and I want to do things just for the sake of doing them. I don't really have an agenda, and it's, oh, I noticed that you started your own company, congratulations, or hey, I saw this. There are times where I think, almost like Mother Teresa says, like, do it anyway, where somebody gets a job. Like, I always remembered, like, Matt Lauer, when he famously told that story, when he got the job, he was working at 9 Broadcast Plaza at Channel 9, a local thing, and one year he got 6 Christmas cards, and the next year he got 200, But if I feel like I'm good-intentioned, I'm not going to let the potential stigma of, like, reaching out to somebody just when they're successful, you say
because Matt Lauer got successful in one
Yeah.
year, so he went from 6 to 200 Christmas cards.
Yeah, because
it's sort of like Walter Mondale,
Yeah.
who used to be Vice President of the United States. He said, I always used to think I had a great sense of humor, and then and then after I was no longer Vice President of the United States, no one would laugh at my jokes anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, I try to maintain friendships, and I'm careful about, more so now, about like who you keep around, and
it's always very sincere, because I see you talking to all these people. You know the details of their lives. You ask about them, ask about their families. You travel to their parents' funerals. Like, you really keep up with everybody. And I'll just give a quick example. Like, one time, this is when Curb Your Enthusiasm was coming out. And I said, who I'd really want to get on the show? And we ended up not getting him on the show for various reasons.
Well, I spoke to them yesterday, and they said they want to do it, so hopefully. Yeah.
But I said I really wanted JB Smoove. You like out of memory, like you'd like dial his phone number and you say here, and I'm talking to JB Smoove on the phone. It's like my favorite, comedian on Curb Your Enthusiasm. And then I met him the next day. He hung out with me and my daughter, but then he had to go back to LA or whatever.
Yeah, and I think what I always try and say to us, it's kind of like, and for the listeners out there in the proverbial James Altucher cubicle or whatever, your bedroom or you're on your path, I think that we'll get hopefully into why I'm here, but I think like I want us to have the best podcast around. I think you're an amazing interviewer. You're terrific, and we'll get back to why I want to be here.
Yeah.
But of course. But what I'm saying, it's like I want us to have people that, when people talk about, like, when you write something, you don't want it just read. You want it spread. You want people to like look at it. And I heard Seth Godin speak about how something remarkable is just that. It's remarkable. There's a difference between excellent and remarkable. You're like, not just like, wow, that's good. You're like, you remark to somebody. You're like, wow, did you see this? And I want us to do that. And and you have. I mean, that's why I'm overjoyed to be here. And for those wondering, this isn't like Pravda or, like, what's the Russian?
That is the Russian newspaper.
Meaning, like, I'm not like, I'm saying this genuinely on my own free will.
No,
but
what Seth Godin said is really interesting, because I think that is the success. People always ask the question, how can I market my book better? How can I market my podcast better? And at that point, it's almost too late once they're asking that.
Yeah.
Because the way it has to be embedded in the product itself, that this is not just a good product, it's something that people are going to want to remark on. Like, you can have something that's extraordinary, But if nobody wants to share it with their friends, it's not gonna
Yeah.
spread. And so but even before you came on board, I started doing everything, in person because I realized any one of my listeners were willing to listen to something, one of my podcasts, even if it wasn't in person. But when it was in person, there was a much higher likelihood that people would then share it because not only the podcast was better because there's all the kind of nonverbal communication, but just the audio quality was simply better.
Yeah.
So they're not embarrassed about sharing it to their friends. Often with Skype, the audio quality is not so good.
Well, I think the details separate the good from the great. It's like when we had Wolfgang Puck here. He talked about we have the best ingredients, we have the best food, and we don't, and so we care. And so,
by the way, we're gonna get to your get to your various mutant powers.
Yeah.
But you've quoted people at least 8 times in the first 5 minutes, and you quoted John Wooden, Madonna, we quoted Wolfgang Puck, Seth Godin.
Yeah.
Who else did you quote? Matt Lauer. That's 5 people.
Yeah. I'm sure I'll have a lot more. John Wooden, definitely quoted John Wooden. He was somebody who I think about often because, in fact, when I look back at what I was doing, one of the things I probably always say to myself is things work out best for those who make the best of the way things work out.
And who is that?
That's John Wooden. I just because I look at it.
Wait, things work the best.
Things work out best for those who make the best of the way things work out, and it helps me. Like it helps me look at things and say, okay,
What's an example of that? It's a hard one. It's a little bit of a tongue twister.
It means how, it's kind of like or Jocko Willink, who says, like, no matter what happens to him, he says, good. I broke my leg. Good. I could use the other leg.
So like, it's sort of like, play the cards you're dealt.
Yeah, yes. It means, like, it definitely means you play the cards you're dealt. But it's also... I couldn't say about any better than that.
All right, so wait. Let's just because I wanna. You've basically been in media for 30 years. So and now you're a podcast producer.
Yeah, I'm excited.
The peak of your career.
Yeah,
is
it's
producing a podcast.
Zenith.
So okay, you went to TV. How long were you?
I was in TV. And I worked at TV. Like I was a desk assistant. Like when I was at WCBS Radio, I looked at it like graduate school for me. Mm-hmm. I felt like
you majored in journalism.
I majored. Right? I was an English major, and I was pre-med because my dad was a doctor, but that wasn't for me. As much as I tried. And
you cannot do biology labs or chemistry labs.
No, and it's just funny. I remember freshman year in college, I had a lab partner from Hong Kong, and brilliant guy. His name was Wyatt Toe. And he said, Steve, I picked you because of your Jewish heritage, and I thought you'd be a lot smarter. But
you would not be able to.
No, and I'm glad. Yeah, it's like, hey,
it's not one of your mutant powers. To
100%. No,
cut up frogs and
1,000%.
Follow orders
no,
like that.
Definitely. Yeah, again. Like I like to say, there's no right way to do the wrong thing. And so...
who's that quoting?
I saw that in a documentary about the Bloods and the Crips, and it was at LA County Jail, and it always stuck with me because it said up on the jail, it said, there's no right way to do the wrong thing. And I felt like, that's right. It's a good message for these rehabilitating prisoners.
What are some examples of that in real life that you've seen?
I think you've talked about in business where it's... If you're with the wrong people or you're with the wrong kind of okay. I mean, there's a lot of it, obviously. Oh, I'm just going to take this thing for 1 minute and bring it back. Or, in TV. Oh, I'm just going to, we've had this before where people say, if you want to do this interview, we're going to make sure, you can't ask about this, or could you give us the questions? And that's an example of, maybe nobody notices it, but it's the wrong thing, and it's not right, and it just sets a downward slope. And
right, we've never done. I don't think we've ever done any interview like that.
I remember when I started, I felt like, okay, James is into finance and everything, and I thought the Wolf of Wall Street was going to be interesting, Jordan Belfort, and they were very insistent on, well, what are the questions, or what are you going to ask, and then I was kind of like, we don't give the questions. It's not something we do, Right. It's like, here's what you wrote a book, and we're going to ask you about stuff, and if you don't want to answer it, don't answer it, but we're going to ask you it. And I remember there was just so much kind of pushback, and they were trying to micromanage it, and we wound up scrambling and putting Mike Posner, who you wound up doing an amazing interview with, and Mike Posner was so impressed with you, and he said, "Wow, you really deep dove. You were really into this." And you said Steve was going to have Wolf of Wall Street, and I said, he's a criminal. I don't want him on. So I was impressed both with your candor and just that, you prepared, and so I definitely appreciate that.
So, okay, so then you how long were you at TV?
Okay, I was at TV for 15 years, really, because I was at the CBS Early Show for 10, and then I was at Good Day New York for 5. But I did want to get back when you mentioned JB Smoove, the purpose of all of this is our listeners. I want us to have the best possible show. I want you to be the best you possibly can, and I'm hoping we're gonna talk about that fateful day, 2 days where we met and we said, hey, we're gonna partner, we're gonna really do amazing things here because I want our people. That in the words of James Taylor, that's why I'm here. Like I want us to be.
Why did James
amazing.
Taylor say that?
I don't know. He wrote that album, right? That's why I'm here.
Oh, okay.
I've seen Fire, I've seen Rain, and
okay. So do you realize, you remember every quote from every movie? Like, you remember some obscure documentary about the Bloods and the Crips. You remember what was, somebody, while they were on their way to the death execution room, he had, tapped into the wall, there's no right way to do the wrong thing, and you remembered that.
Yeah.
And James Taylor, Matt Lauer.
Yeah.
If I give you, a random person, could you, I'll give a quote from George W. Bush. Oh, you quoted Richard Nixon earlier, too.
Yeah. Well, I remember one time I was at a party, and a friend, his friend Steve Hers, who's a prominent agent, and he was introducing me to people, and he's like, watch, Steve Cohen's like Rain Man, and and he introduced me to a broadcaster, and I said, oh yeah, born in 1968, University of Maryland, and he's like, you're creepy and everything. I was like, no, I just remember things,
You do have an extraordinary memory for, not for everything, but for weotes and odd personal details.
Well, yeah, it's funny because...
But the quotes, though, is weird. You remember... Yes. Okay, I'm going to name, what's an obscure movie? Jay, what's an obscure movie that you've seen? Okay, Enter the Dragon with Bruce Lee.
Oh, wow,
Well, give me a quote from Enter the Dragon.
Oh, see, that one I remember from, the 70s. I could tell you stuff from The Last Dragon with Shonuff and Bruce Leroy. Remember that movie?
No.
With Timac, where it was about, a martial artist from Harlem, and his name was Leroy, and they called him Bruce Leroy, and it was a Berry Gordy film. For those of you out there,
so it was kind of a spoof on Enter the Dragon.
It was a terrific movie. It was Vanity was in it. It was a great movie.
Bruce Lee had some good quotes though in Enter the Dragon. I encourage you to.
Yeah. Oh yeah, 100%. No, I mean when I think of Bruce Lee, I think of I fear the person who does one kick 1,000 times rather than 1,000 kicks one time.
Yeah.
But if I've seen it, yes. I don't think that. I remember years ago, a friend of mine and I feel like men quote movies more than women, but I guess that is how my mind works. And I remember one time I was with another friend of mine, and we were in the Hamptons, and we were these women, and they were like, all you guys do is quote movies.
Yeah, but I think you do it more than anyone else I've ever seen. Do you know anyone who knows as many quotes as you?
Well, it's like, they say in dodgeball, if you could dodge a wrench, you could dodge a ball.
Wait, who said from the movie Dodgeball?
Yes. When
who said that? Vince Vaughn?
No, Rip Torn kept he was this weird Hank Azaria played the young Patches O'Houlihan, and he had it was a spoof on sports movies, and he had them.
Wait, isn't Vince Vaughn and Ben Stiller?
Vince Vaughn and Ben Stiller were in it, but it was just he needed money for his gym to do things, and so he had Hank Azaria played this guy who was an expert at dodgeball, and then Rip Torn played him as an older person, and he was teaching him how to play dodgeball, and he was giving them all these drills about dodgeball, and he takes a wrench and wings it at them, and he was saying if you can dodge a wrench, you could dodge a ball, which I always felt means if you could do something really difficult, you could do something easy.
So A, that's an interesting quote to learn from. B, I've seen Dodgeball maybe 3 or 4 times. I do not even remember the scene. I don't remember those actors. That's why I don't remember these things. And I don't know if it's because I'm a normal human being or because I have early onset Alzheimer's, or you just remember all these details.
I try and I just I think.
But you don't remember everything. You
no.
remember quotes.
Yeah, exactly.
You speak in quotes.
Yes. Well, it's funny because, and sometimes I just think it's funny. And like
but all these things that you learn from, like the wrench and the ball,
sure.
that's you. It's not only you remember the quotes; it's like you have the quote is the tip of the iceberg, and then you think about. It's like you spend time thinking about the quote afterwards.
But I remember, and I like, I don't want to jump around here. Of course, those of you in your cubicle probably have a hard time following. But I think that I try and learn from everything that I'm doing. But I think. I remember, and you were very gracious, and when we talked, I'd like for people to know, like everything that you see or hear, that's who you are, and that's one of the reasons that drawn me to you. But you were like, Steve, I'm looking for somebody, and we discussed partnering or coming in, and I said, hey, like Shimon Peres said to Yasser Arafat, if you have a plan, it works once. If you have a partner, it works a lifetime, and it is how. I try not to be like a self-parody. Like, that is how I talk. And I remember when we started back in September, I was in, we had booked a guest, like one of our first guests, and you called me and said, Steve, I'm so sorry. I feel really bad. Oh, my God, it won't happen again. But I need to do something else, and I couldn't do it. I'm like, it's okay. Good news is never late. And never let a temporary inconvenience get in the way of permanent improvement. It's fine. And that is how I think. That is probably how I see the world. And which, obviously, if you see it through the lens or prism of like a Hallmark card and everything is epigrammatic saying, it's not the best thing in the world.
No, not necessarily, because you think about these quotes.
Yeah.
They're all words of wisdom, kind of that have withstood the test of time in some form or other. And so kind of building a life philosophy around them is essentially a shortcut to having wisdom yourself.
Well, yeah, but I also remember, we had gone to see a movie, and you were gracious enough to introduce me and said, Steve really thinks that we can get so-and-so on the podcast or whatever. And I said, well, listen, if I'm going after Moby Dick, I bring tartar sauce. Like, I always expect to get the best and to do it. And some of it's like bravado for humor's sake, but I think also, why not, right?
Yeah.
Like, why not, or like I'll joke and say, take a chance. Columbus took a chance, like there's ways to think about things. And I think that, I do. And if I hear something that resonates with me, I kind of chew on it, like the same way I remember James Carville, I heard him speak about politics, and he said, like, all leaders deal with hope, right? Like Confucius years ago felt like it's hope, like you should inspire people for their better angels. And so for us, what we're doing here, I want people to listen to this and say, wow, this really helped me. And that, honestly, it's, and we'll get back to what really motivated me to want to work with you and to come here. But I love the fact that you said, and even when we met, and, I guess we're jumping around, but the one thing that I really liked was you said, I really enjoy when people stop me and they say, I've helped them and I really inspired them. And that was what your mission was. And I think, I remember when I was at Good Day New York, we had Ava DuVernay on, and one thing she said always really resonated with me, where she said, if your dreams aren't bigger than yourself, you're not dreaming big enough, So that's why are we here? Like, we want to make things better, In your books, you said, who would I help today, and so I definitely see those things, and I try and remember them, because I think my mind is all over the place, and I think a lot of times you have to go back to fundamentals and say, okay, this is what I have to do. Like, every day I have to read the papers, or I don't know if I'd said this, like when I was in TV or radio, I always felt like there's no such thing as a slow news day, only lazy reporters. I felt like, let's go. Like, and or you have to make what's important interesting. And if you're going to do it, let's be the best. And
so you were at all these early shows, and Good Day New York, and this is not a criticism of any one show, but like morning TV in general, there's a certain characteristics of it as opposed to let's say, so morning TV is mostly news, and then there's like afternoon news, kind of like your 5 o'clock news, and then there's kind of late night shows, which are not really news, but are kind of comedic news, like the Daily Show. And I feel morning news is the lightest because people are just getting ready for work. It's supposed to be a little lighthearted. There's like a cooking segment.
Sure.
It's a little more self-helpish.
Sure.
And then the segments are more. Here's interesting things are happening as opposed to like President Trump said yesterday. And so it seems like, but those segments are so light. Like if a book author wants to talk about his book, he has 3 to 5 minutes to do it with commercials and with the host. Obviously, he can't read all the books, so he hasn't read the book, so he's just asking kind of questions on an index card that an assistant handed him a few seconds earlier. So you can't really get depth. In general, I'm not criticizing any one show that you worked on. It's just that whole segment of shows.
Look, I think like the way TV worked from 7 to 9, and top of the 7, you would like have the breaking news. And I guess what helped me was I was somebody who definitely had to produce a lot. I had a lot of different jobs in TV, but
your last thing was, and maybe you did this for a long time. You were producing these shows, so you would have to get the guests and bring them on. And every time I was stopped by Good Day New York, the green room was filled with like these amazing guests. Like the Olympics had just happened. We met the 2016 Olympics had just happened. And
I should tell people. Not to interrupt, but you're the expert interrupting.
Go right ahead.
No, but like James was in the front page of the New York Times, and there was a really great article about your minimalism, and the people there saw it, and the anchors saw it, and they were like, "Hey, we need to get this guy." And so I'd reached out, and and thankfully you had come on, and I knew you had known Brian Koppelman, and then you came and. Yeah, I felt like I definitely made sure, like every day, it was an opportunity. I looked at TV not as a privilege, not as a reward, but as a responsibility and a privilege. And I felt like we have I never was pretentious about journalism, but I said like, hey, let's do our best. Like this is our time to do it, and let's go. And so, and when you came, I was incredibly impressed. Like you had a lot of mystique, and I knew you had a daughter, and I said, hey. I always like to tell guests who else was on the show and to just try and make connections and make it stickier and to think like, okay, I want them to have an experience, where they get the most out of it when they're there. And I noticed that a lot. Like I would have a lot of cool people in there and they'd always remember it. I think most notably, I remember when we had Brian Grazer on. Who wrote a book called The Curious Mind, and he was really interested in a lot of stuff, and he was unbelievable because I realized, like as I did with you, that he was pretty authentic. Like we had Michael Buffer, the Let's Get Ready to Rumble guy. We had
well, you were constantly you had great guests, and you were constantly pulling them in. So I think that your years in TV getting thousands of guests for these shows hooked you up with not only all the guests, but all their managers, agents, publicists. So that built this extraordinary network for you. Like, and then I don't know how you keep up with all the publicists, agents, managers, people, but you do.
I was always very receptive to them. Like, I felt like, I remember years ago I read book by Herb Cohen, or heard him talk about negotiating, and
he's a Southwest Airlines guy.
No, that's Herb Kelleher. Herb Cohen was Rich Cohen's dad, who you had on about the Rolling Stones book, which and all that, and he was very interesting. And I remember like listening about what he was saying, and he was saying sometimes in a negotiation, a guy goes in there and he's trying to buy a car, and maybe he wants to get it down $1,000. Maybe he just wants to be treated with respect. Maybe he wants to impress his girlfriend. Maybe, and I just think like, to me, maybe that publicist wants to just have somebody respond to them. And I had hundreds, if not thousands of them said, wow, you were always so nice. And I just feel like it's a marathon, not a sprint. You're trying to play the long game, and you're trying to have partners with these people. And if you're not, and be honest with them and to say, okay, this one doesn't work, but here's why.
Well,
and I dig my well before I'm thirsty. I would say, I would know. So a month or two later, I would know. And I think a funny story is one time when I was at the early show, I was outside and I met Suge Knight was there, and everybody was intimidated to go up to him. And I walked right up to him and I said, hi, I'm Steve Cohen. I'm at CBS Early Show, and perhaps we could have you on someday. And they're like, why would you go up to him? And I was joking, but I was like, he could smoke somebody or next week or 2 weeks, and we might need him, and you never know. And at least I have his information. And lo and behold, he got into some trouble, and I remember it was Suge at the Road, but I felt like.
Were you able to get him on?
Oh yeah, well he called in, or like we dealt with him. Yeah, I think like I always felt like, yeah, just if you don't ask. I remember a guy I always was impressed with, and I think we should have him on, is Pat Croce, who like. I remember reading an article on him in Success Magazine, and he said, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And he talked about how he went from being the trainer of the Philadelphia 76ers then to owning 40 fitness centers, and just how he really built himself up. I was inspired by that.
I agree with that. But you can't. But then asking itself is a subtle skill. So like when you going up to Suge Knight and just being friendly and saying hey and just exchanging information, that's subtle. If you said, hey, can you come on? I know you're a busy guy. Can you come on tomorrow? To Good Day New York, that might be too much. Oftentimes people ask me because they think it can't hurt. They said, hey, I'm in town for a day. Can you have coffee with me tomorrow? It'll only be 5 minutes. It's never 5 minutes. It's an hour. And, and then it's up to me. He just outsourced a no to me. Like I have to now say no or I'm rude because I didn't respond. And that happens to me a lot.
Oh, yeah.
So it's how you ask, too. Like, what's the best way to ask?
The best way to ask somebody is to being mindful of what they want and to make it clear to them that it could benefit them, and it's not.
So Adam Grant has this distinction between givers, takers, and I guess the people in the middle are like transactioners. I forget what he called it.
Would you ever hear that joke? I remember somebody said to me, Steve, I view the world as being divided into givers and takers. And I said, I view the world as being divided into people who divide the world into categories, people who don't divide the world into categories.
I have heard that joke.
Okay, at least I try. Like, for the listeners out there, I always felt like, even if they're not the best jokes, I think at least you're trying. At least you're trying to be good-natured. But Adam Grant, sorry.
But I think what you're saying is before you go up to someone, you don't know if they're a giver or a taker or if they're transactional in some way.
Yeah.
And so you kind of play it from all angles. Like you make sure you're delivering before you ask them.
Yeah.
So you're like polite to them, but maybe you might comment on something they did, that's newsworthy and that you admired, and then you might say, maybe one day, or you're never really pushy about it.
No, and I felt like one of the things I always felt like it's how do you get people to a party? You invite them early, you invite them often, you be a good host, you tell them who else is at the party, you give them party favors, you make them feel good about doing it, and you're honest and you're authentic. And some of the people that we've had here or whoever that I wasn't crazy about, I didn't find them genuine. I didn't find them authentic. And getting back to you, like I meant to say with Brian Grazer, but Brian Grazer was like so excited to talk to Michael Buffer because he does that thing where every 2 weeks he talks to somebody, and he was like, great, I don't have to do it anymore. Like he was there, and I thought it was really cool. And like just that, I thought like that's who he is. He wasn't trying to sell a book. He really did it for its own sake. And so when I saw you, we talked like that day you were there, and then you had come when Ryan Holiday was there. You were so interested in everybody else there, but you were unassuming. You didn't have a sense of entitlement. You were nice to everybody around there. And I found, and even to people who I felt should have known who you were but didn't, like, I felt like, yeah, I thought that was terrific. I thought that was really great.
When I came on the first time, it was after that New York Times piece you mentioned. I don't actually remember very well my segment, but I do remember because you had mentioned this was right after the Olympics. Laurie Hernandez, who I guess won silver or gold in gymnastics, was on, and my daughter was a big fan, and I guess you had read I had a daughter, and you said have your daughter come in, and then the thing I remember is my daughter, me, and Laurie Hernandez took a photo together. Sure. So that was good. That's the thing I remember the most from that first appearance.
No, and I think, look, I'm the son of a physician, or my parents or people around me, and my dad always had a bedside manner. I see him now. 50 years he's been doing it, and he knows all these patients. He sat down with them, and he cared about them. He was a caregiver. He cared about people, and that's the currency that you have over there with them. And I always tried to do that with the people I worked with, or, I try to be thoughtful. Like if there was, and I've always felt that those that know you best should love you most, like those people around you. And so I'd like to think like if you stopped in the street and saw somebody who worked with me, they would say, wow, he was thoughtful, or he was a nice person, or he like if there were guests on the show, if there was somebody who liked Ultimate Fighting, I would say, oh, Tyler loves Ultimate Fighting. You should meet, Ronda Rousey. Or I tried to be thoughtful. Or if like David Ortiz was there, and like the guy from the mailroom, I remember he was speaking Spanish with him, and I said, oh, he taught himself Spanish just so he could meet you. Or, and I tried to be thoughtful, and I do think the little things add up, and like with people. But
But here's the question I have. So I'm really bad at following up with people.
Yeah.
Like I'll meet them, and then they'll write me emails, and I focus very much on, I try to write, I try to prepare for podcasts, I podcast, I do stand-up comedy. But a lot of people will meet me and then write emails like, hey, it was nice to meet you. Or I'll meet people who are guests on this podcast. Yeah. And I feel like I want to follow up and I want to build a network and I want to connect. I just don't have the time or the energy, and it's not on the top list of my priorities. Although for you, building your network for 30 years has been on the top of your priorities. But like when you had 500 people in your network and you're keeping track of all of them and following up, that's one thing. I think now you have at least, just from what I've seen, you have at least 10,000 people in your network. Like, it must be half the day just following up with all of them.
Yeah, no, I think also, like, the perfect's enemy of the good. And sometimes it's like, if you don't do it right away, like the other day, we did a great podcast with Mike Massimino, and thank you, Mike, for coming, and thank you, Kathy, his manager, who was great. And I feel like sometimes you put pressure on yourself to be like, wow, I have to write this really florid email, or I want to, and then the longer you wait, the more burdensome it is. But if you do it right away, then you don't have that psychic energy of feeling guilty. And, I think we all learn from people around us. And I had a friend who was at William Morris Agency, and they famously always get back to somebody within a day. And I tried to just get better at that, to just say, okay, one stitch in time saves 9. Like, if you could do it in that sense. But I also feel like what I've told you, remember, with people around you, like, those that matter don't mind, and those that mind don't matter. Like, those people who genuinely want what's best for you, they just want to hear from you. They want to see you. Like, and so when we went to trips, and I had friends in those places, and then before I used to think like, wow, I don't want to email them at the last minute, but like, the people who really want to see you, you can email them anytime, call them, and you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be honest. I just try and be honest. Like, hey, I'm sorry it didn't work out. I did the best I possibly could. I'll make it up to you. And I think that's really, I just try and be as honest as possible. We've had guests who were unhappy, but like, I also saw the world.
Wait, we had guests who were unhappy?
No, not us. Here, no. We didn't have it. Honestly, and I'm not just saying it, like, we didn't have any guests who were unhappy. But I'm like, at Good Day New York, one of the anchors might have said something, or the early show, we asked tough questions, and, I remember one time, I'll give you a fun story. Like, so one year we interviewed Bill Clinton for the Clinton Global Initiative. And one of the anchors went with Harry Smith, who's a terrific anchor. And one time we didn't get to really ask him about the Clinton Global Initiative. It was like, I want to say it was 2008. The country, and a lot of stuff was going on, and it was like the meltdown, and Obama was there. It was like October, I forget, maybe September, October 2008. And there was all this stuff going on, and so Harry Smith said, hey, sorry, President Clinton, I'm going to have to take a rain check on that whole situation. And they went ballistic. I mean, like, his people were like, rain check, and for a long time they were disappointed, and they kept emailing. Like, if somebody at Face the Nation had wanted to ask something, they would say, sorry, we'll have to take a rain check on that request. And so then I remember, like, with these early show umbrellas, and I sent like 10 of them saying, hey, I sent them like those people, like Clinton's people, umbrellas, saying, hey, I just thought you might want these umbrellas in case it rains. And eventually it thawed things out. But, I could play the music. I can't always make everybody dance,
But still, it's like, it seems like you're always thinking of that extra effort to keep in touch. Like, I think half the reason you read the news is just to see if there's people in your network mentioned, so you could send them a note, just keeping in touch.
Yeah, but I also, like, for us, like, for what we're doing here and for the listeners, and it's a great community of people, I vicariously appreciate when they come to you, and, we have a purpose here. We do, and that was what brought me here. But I think that Yeah, some of it's superstition. Some of it's like, hey, it's habit. Some of it, but I think a lot of it also, like, I like to read the actual papers. Like, I remember Mayor Bloomberg had said, like, he liked to read the actual papers because you see stuff you're not looking for. Or it sparks different things. But sure, I would read different things. And
by the way, you've quoted like over 100 people now so far in this podcast. But again, you're borrowing the wisdom from Bloomberg. You're borrowing the wisdom from whoever. So I don't think it's a bad thing. It's just you have this memory for quotes. It's the three mutant powers, I will say. You have this memory for quotes. You have this enormous network, and I guess related to that power is the power to kind of keep up with that network, so that everyone, I would say, ranges from thinking on the upper end, like Steve Cohen is great. I'm always going to return his call and do whatever he asks. And the worst is, okay, Stephen Cohen is this mildly weird guy, but I'm still going to return his call. Because I remember I told one guy who's been a frequent guest on this podcast, we just hired this producer. He's coming from TV, the Good Day New York. And he said, isn't that weird guy, Steve Cohen? And then... but then he later, a few months later, came up to me and said, "Man, I can't believe you got Kareem Abdul-Jabbar on your podcast. How'd you get him?" And I was like, Steve Cohen.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think my dad used to always say, like, with his patients, and I think 95% of them loved him, but most people hopefully swear by you. Some are going to swear at you. And again, that's fine too. Like with people, like I've seen all kinds of people, and weird's fine. I think if you're a nice person, I can deal with, like if you're a genuinely nice
the person who said that didn't mean anything
and
bad.
that's fine too, but like maybe I am probably a little bit weird and
he certainly didn't mean it as an insult, but you are a little bit weird.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. No,
because you speak in quotes.
Yes,
and
absolutely,
every single human being on the planet.
No, of course, and no, and I definitely. It's funny, like speaking of quotes, I remember in Dumb and Dumber where there's that scene where he goes, "What a complete moron." And then he goes, "No offense." And then he says, "None taken." So I'm not offended. It's fine. It's, but I think that I just try and be the best version of me I can be. And I try and treat people the way I want to be treated. But I also think there is I just think you want to be genuine. You want to be like who you are. And I remember years ago, I read a book by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who had like the 5 stages of death and dying. And it impacted me because she wrote like her autobiography, and she said when she got older, she was this celebrated speaker at universities, and she always knew if like the people, and up on stage, the president would walk her up and put his arm around her and give her this really like bombastic kind of introduction. And then like an hour later, when everybody left, she'd be left to go get to her car. This like frail old lady trying to go to her car because nobody was watching and they weren't doing it that way. So, they weren't as concerned about her once everybody left. They were concerned about what they were doing in public. It's the old, like, be more concerned with your character than your reputation. Like, this is who you are. And so I think in general, I hope people around me are the same way. Like I always say, like those that know you best should love you most, like your friends and those around you. And those are the ones, hopefully, that we should care about, and then, but you treat people fairly, you treat people the way you'd want to be treated. And when I try not to be like, I've had people approach me, I've been on both sides of it, and like they approach you checking in, or like, and like, or like it could be an intern who came back like, all the whole year they weren't really interested, and then come May they're about to graduate, and then, "Hey, I loved working with you," and it's like a form letter, and it's not genuine, and I don't know, it's not the way it should be done, as far as I think.
And it's weird because on the one hand, like I've seen you approach a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like so the other thing you do is okay, now I will list another mutant superpower, which is you somehow get invited to every single TV screening, book party, of movie screening. We saw. I mean, Louis C.K.'s movie was never even released, and we saw the movie in a theater. It was just you, me, and a friend.
Yeah.
And no one else in the whole theater.
Yeah, it was fun.
And then the next day, the movie was never released.
Yeah.
And we saw. We've seen so many movies and TV shows, and plus other screenings and symposiums and this and that. And every symposium we go to, there might be a crowd of 500 people, but you always know the main people on the stage, and I'm able to talk to them because you know them. Forgot where that was going.
But I also feel like, look, you are the Honda Civic. You sell yourself. Like, it should be, I believe in what we're offering. I believe it. I could evangelize about it because I've seen you. I know what you can do.
But I think then, like, so what I was going to ask with that is sometimes, so I always, 100% of the time I see you go up to the people and say, we should have you on the show, we should do this, we should do that, and I loved you in this, loved you in that. You're always able to have a conversation. Some people respond very well to it. Some people back off a little bit, and so my question is, at first I thought maybe you're not reading all of their social cues, like an Asperger-ish kind of thing, which I think there's a little bit element
100%,
of that.
100%, of course.
But I think also it's like you say, you're not really asking anything, and it doesn't really hurt to talk to them for 3 seconds, and so I think that's part of your approach too, so that they remember you later and later and later.
Yeah. Look, I think, again, getting back to Seth Godin, I was influenced when he said, when I got 3 rejections, I said, oh, great, only 96 more to go. And I honestly believe that we're offering something really good to people. What are we offering them? A vast, educated listenership, some smart people, a great conversation with somebody who prepares. Like, I can go up to people. We had, one of our first interviews since I was here was Nancy Cartwright, who was the voice of Bart Simpson and a lot of other people. And afterwards, she was gushing, like, this was the best interview I ever saw. Like, you prepare. And I was impressed with it.
Like with Nancy, I mean, I watched the movie. Her movie hadn't yet been released. I watched the whole movie, and I cited everything in her career. It's 29 years as Bart and as Bart Simpson and all her acting career before then. And she was so fascinating to me. But you also, like, we're gonna interview someone in a little bit. You also read the books. Like, I spent the whole night reading this book, and you also read the book.
I tried to read the book. I felt like, again, John Wooden, rest in peace. He always felt like if you don't have time to do it right the first time, when are you gonna have time to do it over again? And I felt like, oh, that's a great opportunity. Like, maybe we could connect on this, or because you're not gonna go back. You're not gonna try and do it. And so I try to, I just do my best. And I think that's what I'm trying to do here. And for those listening, and, you could email JamesAltucherShow@gmail and tell us what you think and how you found me weird, or tweet at James. But like,
but what? Okay, but before.
No, but I want us to be the best. I want us to be the best. And so I think that, it's like the expression, like, champions do every day what losers do only occasionally. And there's a way to approach it. I want to say Mike Tyson or something, who also famously said, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. Yeah. So I think that you should, or, you have to do things that you hate and act like you love them. But I enjoyed it. It's great. It's an honor to, like, meet these authors and these brilliant people.
But you met them at Good Day New York and see this early show. So my question is, like, how many? So while you were at Good Day New York, I don't know where it was when you started, but when you
they were third, they were like third, and it wasn't just because of me, but like then they became number one. They were
while you were there, I mean, I think it was. I mean, you bring in the guests, and that brings in the viewers. It became number one in the biggest regional market in the country. So
and there were other reasons.
And how many people view a morning show like that? Like, what are the numbers?
It's, 250,000 maybe, 300,000, in New York,
So every day?
Every day, yeah, which was fine. I mean, at the early show was 3 million, and today's show is like 6 million, which I was.
Why'd you go from the early show to Good Day New York?
I went from early show. I had a friend, Dave Price, who was an anchor, who became an anchor at Good Day New York. And I'd left in 2012 when they switched over from the early show to CBS This Morning, when Charlie Rose and Gayle King and them came in. And I was actually getting a little bit tired of TV to begin with. There was other things I kind of wanted to do. But then Dave, and again, just for you listening out there, I remember I said, and he had gotten the anchor job over there. He'd been weatherman at the early show. And we were close. And he said, hey, I know you know those people, but if you want to come, love to have you work with me. And
So you didn't mind going to a show that
I
had
was-
1/10 the audience?
I was
but you felt there was
reluctant
a
to
challenge.
it. I mean, I felt like, I remember joking with Dave, and I said, Dave, I feel like Olivia Newton-John, and I'm in Australia with my lover, and you want me to go back to Rydell High? And he was like, I feel like Olivia Newton-John too, because I want to get physical with these people, and he had wanted somebody he knew and felt like
I feel like
could help
Olivia
him.
Newton-John because I want to go back to Xanadu.
Exactly. But no, and I felt like, and I remember starting there, and I remember it was different, and I remember coming in, and I remember feeling a little bit defeated that I was going back to television because I wanted to do other stuff. And when I got there, I remember reading The Psychology of Winning, and Dennis Waitley had said, successful people focus on the flowers, not the weeds. And I said, wow, here's a chance. And believe me, they weren't, when I went there, some of the other producers, they weren't hugging me, singing me Kumbaya. They were like threatening, who is this guy? Or they probably had their own thoughts about, well, why is he going from network TV to local? And it was an environment that was fine,
And how do you deal with that kind of hostility in the workplace from your coworkers?
I remember, well, among other things, it's funny. I remember when I was at the early show, people knew me, and so I could wear more colorful shirts. And I remember honestly joking, like, I just wanted to be like, come in a certain way. And I remember saying, the nail that sticks out gets hammered. I'm going to wear a white shirt. And I wore like I look like a white shirt and like every single day. I wasn't wearing pastels, but I felt like that's fine. You got to get along to go along. And I knew like persistence beats resistance. I felt like I had a job to do, and I didn't necessarily take it. I didn't take it personally. Like I didn't.
It seemed to me like you were just very focused on just every day getting the best possible guest, and
Yeah.
ultimately that would prove
yeah.
to everybody that you were.
Yeah, of course. And but truth is, like, it's
Yeah,
just,
and you don't seem like the type to play office politics.
no, I wasn't like that. And the truth of the matter is, I was working really, really hard all the time, and I didn't have time to kind of politic over there and to shoot the breeze with management over there. And I would say this to everybody out there, that I felt like you want to be around people who really want you to do well. You want to be around people who, want you to do well, not just people who don't want you to screw up. And some environments are better than others. I thought that was an environment that was fine. I think that, I chafed a lot of times because you might say, and I, from having read Choose Yourself, you'd know this better than anybody, but you'd go to them and you'd feel frustrated and you would say, well, I think I deserve more of this. And they say, well, Steve, we wish we could. And I remember saying, well, I feel like I've been exceptional. You should treat me exceptionally. And they were like, don't work for free, or, and I felt like the experience wasn't going to have meaning unless I really excelled. The narrative of your arc is to go from network to local. And I knew that, like a basketball coach or something who went from pros to college, like, okay, if you can win a national title there, it's going to have meaning and it's going to be exciting. And so jump to when I came with you throughout my career, like I brought network level people to a local radio station. Then I did it at network TV. And then when I went to local TV, I was able to bring network type people and I looked at it in sports, like you were almost like a mid-major. Again, you and I share a huge interest in sports. You're reading those box scores every day.
Zero interest on my part, but you know every statistic from 1909 onwards.
And you get back about like your network too. Like I always felt like you want people to be, you want things to be a push towards you rather than a pull. You want to select. You don't want to just keep recruit. But I knew, like when I got there, I knew I was going to bring really exciting people over there and an energy, and it was going to make it better for that place over there. And that
because you were coming from a national platform to a local, so you had that network.
I had that network, but I was Avis. I tried harder, I did, and like these people are paying me. It's a job, and like you're gonna go.
Now you even quoted like an advertising slogan. But okay, why'd you go from TV, and being producing the number one morning news show in New York City, to the podcast world?
The podcast. Okay, so
forgetting about me. Just
and I always had an interest in podcast. I think like people over there would always make fun of me because when we would have a guest on, I think like podcasts kind of got bigger recently, but we'd have a guest on, and I would try and walk to work every day, and it was about a half-hour walk, and like if we were gonna have a guest on, I would always listen to them. I would try and maximize my time. So and so I started discovering podcasts, and I got really into them. And like people would joke saying, "Oh, you love podcasts? You like Rotten Tomatoes?" Because I would always quote Rotten Tomatoes. And I remember one time we had a woman from Rotten Tomatoes, and we had that actor Eric Andre, and I said,
Love Eric Andre. Can we get
yes,
Eric Andre
yes,
on the podcast?
Yes, he'd be terrific. Hi, Eric. And he was very self-effacing and really bright guy. But I remember saying to the Rotten Tomatoes, I'm like, I'm not new to this. I'm true to this. Like, for example, Eric Andre, The Internship, 34% Rotten Tomatoes. And he was like...
Eric Andre, The Internship, Man Seeking Woman, who, by the way, I had Simon Rich on twice, who wrote the book.
And have Jay Barish we'll have to have on.
And Eric Andre, the Eric Andre show is the most brilliant.
Him and Hannibal Buress. So you guys are welcome if you're listening, as I know you are. So Eric, please come, and we'll have a great
By the way,
time.
this is the kind of conversation Steve and I have about guests.
Yeah.
Is that like suddenly I'll get like fascinated by somebody and I'll like beg you, like, this is the only one I want on.
No, he's great, but that was one thing. Okay, so you asked me why I went to podcast, and I did feel like you'd come in April, and I kind of remember, you're a fascinating, brilliant guy, and I followed it away, and then a year later, we had Ryan Holiday for his book Perennial Seller, and all of a sudden, like, you're like his wingman, his road dog. You're kind of hanging out with him there, and I'm like, holy moly, this is James, and it just seemed like the right. And Ryan and I were chatting about a lot of different things, and I want to say Lee Child was there.
No, Brad Thor.
Brad Thor, sorry, and we were chatting, and I mentioned that I was really exploring, trying something different and going into this arena because I really enjoyed it. And you said, well, I'm looking for somebody. And so I was really excited and interested. And then we started talking. And for those people out there, I felt like this guy is authentic. Like, this guy is something else. Like, I wanted, and just when we started talking about guests, that you talked about who was there that day. And I remember, like, I kind of broke it down for you like a fine powder. I was like, okay, this person's there, and his publicist is kind of a little bit abrasive. And then you said, well, I don't even want that person. I want this person. And you were so interested in every single thing. And it was the old line, like you heard about people where they said they're interesting and interested, and you are, and that's what you want. Like, I always felt like I'd rather tame a wild horse than motivate a mule, and you want to be at a place worthy of your talents, and you want somebody who is really, really wants to do well. Like, you want to be the best. And it was different. And having worked in TV for a long time, you would deal with a lot of people who are narcissists. And it was a way, and I joke about it, like the old Chris Rock line where he said when Siegfried and Roy were attacked, everybody was like, that tiger went crazy. That tiger went crazy. He's like, that tiger didn't go crazy. That tiger went tiger. That's the nature of the beast. There's an insecurity. They're on TV. But to me, a lot of these people, it seems like they want fame, and they get addicted to it, and you may want all those things, but it's like you really appreciated like that people, you really wanted to help people. You've been through your own troubles and were honest and authentic about it. And when I saw the way you treated other people, I watched around, and I felt like, wow, I don't want to I want, like Wayne Dyer said, I wanted to be like a no limit person, Do you have 1 second? I just want to drink from this Kool-Aid.
Wayne Dyer, by the way, was like my second or third podcast.
And it was a great interview. But I did find that to be, and I did try and do my research, and I looked around some mutual friends we had, and I read the Forbes magazine piece, which said you're a great dad, or the other one said you're the most interesting person in the world, or I saw different things, and I felt like, but I felt like I remember saying to you again, you're a huge sports fan, we could be like Belichick and Brady, or like, and we have a great team here, and they're great. It's, our friends, people at Agora who or Jay, and just, Michelle and Pam and Savannah and, Bill, who does work with us. So they're great people, and I'm excited, Matt and Doug, so it's a great team, and I'm excited, and to be part of it.
But like, I would say that on the one hand, podcasts are great because, and we've stayed pretty consistent to the theme of peak performance.
Yes.
So that's why, like, someone might be famous for some newsworthy reason, but if they're not like peak performer
Sure.
or the best in the world or something we're having at some point, we usually say no. You
Yeah.
you pitch 1,000 ideas to me,
Yeah.
and a lot of them are no's, and I feel bad sometimes saying no, but I'm able to explain the reasoning, and you're like, okay, fine, like right away you say okay, fine, and
But
then the
yeah.
other thing is I forgot what.
But you were talking about like moving from TV to podcast, why I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
But I remember when we met, you were saying, Steve, I think this is like 1951 television and we're in the first inning. And I felt like.
Well, and also we're able to
Yeah.
get a lot deeper with the guest than
Yeah,
a 3-minute
yeah.
segment. Like we have 2-hour podcasts
Yeah.
sometimes. Like we're able to really dive in deep to someone's life and the parallel between
Yeah.
their life and their work and their peak performance and what struggles they had, and it really teaches people how to achieve peak performance. I don't think you can get it. You can't really do that on a morning news show.
No, absolutely. And I remember you said, "Hey, and good morning, New York," and you didn't even have the name right of the show. And you were like, they asked me for 5 minutes, but here I could go in for a long time. And yeah, I think it's a great medium. I feel like if we're gonna do it, let's do it and be the best at it. Let's give our most value to it. And again,
But okay, let me ask you this:
Yeah.
like again, the numbers are still not as high
Yeah.
as TV.
Yes.
So you went from national TV
Yeah, sure,
to local
sure.
TV to here, and numbers are getting up there with local
Yeah, yeah.
TV and
Yeah,
cable
yeah, of
TV.
course. Yeah, yeah.
But it's not there yet. Do you think it's gonna?
I do think they're gonna keep getting better and
Why?
better. And because for us, I mean, I think you do an amazing job. We're gonna keep at it, and I think we're gonna keep doing better with it. We'll get better, and more people are gonna find value. I think it's just what you said. Like and we have to be disciplined, and we have to be like the bartenders that don't just serve what we want to drink, but what other people want to drink, and
but by
make
the way-
sure that we think of them.
By the way, the fourth mutant superpower, you send out. I remember you told me in the beginning you
Yeah.
send out 50 to 100 letters a day
Yeah, I
asking
try
people
to.
to come on the
Yeah.
podcast, and certainly 98% of them say no, and 2% might say yes. And so you deal with you're asking a lot and you're dealing with a lot of rejection, but you never really take it as a rejection. You always
Yeah.
give a quote about
sometimes I
rejection.
got better at it. Like I got better at, and I've learned a lot. Honest, swear to God, like, we talk about like having a quantum leap, but like I learned a lot in this period of my life. But, I think it's not about me. It's not about my ego. It's about, we're offering them something really good. And I think like we try and be as honest as possible and figure out a way that it could be mutually beneficial to the guest who comes and feels like, wow, James invested in them. He asked me good questions. He wasn't trying to be gossipy. He wasn't trying to make it transactional. He was trying to learn something, and he was genuinely curious. And what I could tell everybody who listens, like when I would see you outside of this is who you are. Like you meet friends of mine and you ask these questions and you're concerned about them, or people came up. We had an event here in New York, and these people were appreciative that you were genuinely curious. And trust me, I've seen a ton of people where they weren't concerned about, people in the public eye. They weren't concerned about those people, and they didn't, and people would travel to see them, and they weren't interested in them. So, but how do we get better? I think we have to do things every day that other people aren't doing. We have to provide more value. We have to,
But it's hard. Like I see you, like
Yeah.
you're constantly reading because that's how
Yeah.
you get
Yeah.
news, and also you read the books of the
Yeah.
guests and potential guests. So you're constantly reading. You're constantly writing to people, whether
Yeah.
it's following up or asking
Sure.
them, or and also you have this way of connecting the dots. So you'll say, this person has this publicist, and we've had on this other publicist person as a guest. So now we'll get this. You're constantly connecting the dots, and that's how
Sure.
you generate your 50 emails a day. And
Yeah.
then you follow up to all the rejections,
Sure.
and you ask again, and then at night. You're every 7 nights a week. You're at screenings or events or whatever, and you asked me to go to a lot of these, but I just can't. Like, how do you have a personal life?
No, I've fortunately been starting to have more of a personal life, and I think you have to allow yourself to do it. And I think I'm fortunate to have a lot of friends or dating. I'm single. I hope to, meet
Ladies
the right
and
person.
gentlemen.
Maybe exactly. Hope to meet the right person, or maybe I've already met that person. And I think but I don't necessarily it's not like I'll go to the opening of an envelope. Like I try and say no. I mean, I think, you know, and one of the things I've even said to us with what we were doing, I remember Graydon Carter famously said, it's not who you let in, it's who you let out, like when you do stuff. So for us, we shouldn't always go for the low-hanging fruit or what's easy, and we have to have intent. Why are we putting this person on?
No, you always go for,
Yeah.
again,
Oh, yeah.
getting like, I
Yeah.
mean, some of the guests you've got on, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Wolfgang Puck. I've never
Yeah.
seen these two on
Yeah.
podcasts before. You've gotten a lot of people on who have been on 0 other podcasts.
Yeah, I mean, no, thank you. But
Richard
I think,
Branson. You
Oh yeah,
got
that
on.
was to me that, and that's something I think about a lot. Not having it, but what he said, like James, I was very impressed with that interview, and it really impacted me because you kept pushing him. You said, "What if you're not a billionaire? What if you're not rich? What if you're not like outgoing?" And he just said stuff that I think about every day, like a lot. Where it's like people want to be around people who are positive. People want to be around people who praise you. People want to be around people who look for the best in other people. So I felt like I got a lot out of that. I hope our listeners do too. And so that's what animates me. Like I'm not trying to be like a taxidermist to get all these pelts on the wall like some other people do. Like we want to be the best. We want to have the best podcast. And that is what appealed to me about you. You really, really want on a mission, and we'll get there. And it's and I think we're doing an amazing show for those who are listening now. And what you realize too, it's like, and I realized this at Good Day New York, and I remember Gretchen Rubin, who I think is terrific, and she came one day.
She's been on twice.
Yeah, she's great, and I loved a lot what she had to say. But I remember she came and we had, you know. These rappers from the Locks, a guy named Styles P and Angela Yee, who came on about their juice bar, and hopefully we're gonna do stuff with them. And I remember among other things, she wrote a book called like Money, Power, Respect, and he had a rap song called Money, Power, Respect, because I remember they were talking to each other, and she had no idea who he was, but she felt like, okay, we live in an area of micro celebrity, like we live in an area where. And so that's fine. Like for me, or you ask about numbers, it's you bloom where you're planted. Like you're here, and it's not quantity, it's quality of what you're doing. And you have said it, Ryan Holiday said it, like we do a really good product, and A Thing of Beauty is a joy forever, and we're gonna really do a good job with it. But like, so I'm not really concerned about, like, now that I've moved away from TV or other medias, like we try and ascribe value based on external factors. You know, it could be like I could buy a sweater and they'll say, oh, you know, this sweater is a cashmere sweater for $300, and
Like the
you
one
know,
I'm wearing.
yeah, but like you can get it for $50. Well, it might not be worth $300. You know, it might not be worth $50 for you. And similarly, okay, just because like a million other people watch something doesn't mean that it's better for me or for us. You know, there's a lot of stuff out there, and so hopefully, you know, the more people who are exposed to it are getting value from it, and we get better. And
So you know, I think what I wanna point out is this podcast is gonna come out. I also think this is the one of the times where check out the post that goes along with this podcast, because I think what we should do is extract every quote at its source that you've said. We should title this podcast "The Tao of Steve." Let's get all your quotes out there, plus your mutant superpowers, and maybe like books on how to get those superpowers. Because I think they're somewhat learnable, even from people who are not quite on the Asperger spectrum. And you know, I also want to mention, Steve, we're not just doing the podcast; we're trying other things like YouTube channels, which we haven't yet launched yet, and you know, and you're working on projects. We'll talk about them next time. We'll definitely have you on as a guest again at some point.
Let me check my schedule and see if I'm free.
And thanks so much,
Thank
Steve
you very
Cohen,
much. Thank you.
producer of the James Altucher Show podcast. You've brought on so many amazing guests, and I think people need to learn from your example if they're doing anything basically in life.
Yeah, thank you. I've enjoyed working with you and everybody here. I think they're amazing people, so I'm excited. So looking forward to many more happy returns.
Hey, thanks for listening to the James Altucher Show on YouTube today. I have a really special brand new episode coming out next week, but you can watch it early. Just click on the link right here or subscribe to the channel when you click on my face. Oh, 1 second. Don't forget to click the bell. I'll see you next time.